questions when you're ready.
All right.
Josh, with the $10 million basketball donation yesterday, how does that work? How do you expect you will flow that through athletics?
Yeah, so a couple different ways. Had very intentional meetings with Adam. He is a tremendous supporter, has a great helping us build a vision where he believes we can go as a program. So a lot of it's going to be into the infrastructure when you talk about staffing. It's going to get into some of the data analytics and how we're going to use data and basically assisting us from a kind of a pseudo general manager perspective with some positions we're going to be able to add. And then there's some other monies in there that'll help that as I'm looking to do some stuff with Stegman. There are going to be some opportunities there as well. As you know, I've been pushing for that video board that we showed a while back that I think now we'll be able to at a faster pace to get that up sooner than later. So a bunch of different ways, and that process will evolve a little bit over time as well.
Josh, last season there was Delta sponsorship in Samford. Are you guys planning on having a field sponsor for this season, whether it's Delta or another company?
Yeah, we're looking into it, but we're very intentional about being selective. We don't want it just to be anyone, and the value's got to be right. You don't want to just take a deal too soon. So we've got a couple of irons in the fire, but we've got a few to work through. So whether it's talking about jersey patches, whether it's talking about field logos, we've got a few things in the works.
How do you balance like the obviously the additional revenue that would come from that versus the fan reaction that comes from putting something on a jersey, putting something on the field? Like what are all the considerations?
Yeah, look, and that's why you try the best you can to make sure your preference is always someone like Delta or Coke because of the regionality, and those things aren't always easy because they're national brands and they've got to be respectful to every school in the country. But so you try there first, but you have to get fans to understand that we're in a new era where money is a huge piece of the competitive advantage. So I would ask the question, would you rather have a team that's winning games with a logo or no logo not winning? So I think, and that's part of it. We understand that, and I appreciate the passion of our fans that would love it just to be plain and simple. But at the end of the day, we've got to do what's best that's going to push us forward and give us a chance to be successful.
We've seen this past year, with football roster costs exploding, $40, $45 million for some schools. What is Georgia's confidence that you guys can continue to remain financially competitive in terms of what you guys are spending in terms of keeping a roster together?
Yeah, I'm extremely confident. With that's why it's so important that we're playing by the same rules. As we're talking about what can come from the school from a rev share point and what can be done from over the cap. It's not a question of do we have the money or can we raise the money. It's how right now the issue is activating the money. And we've got a bunch of schools like us that are getting the money in, trying to activate it the right way, running into some challenges of how it's being interpreted through the CSC. And that's one battle. But as I mentioned yesterday, the first battle is the ones that aren't even reporting the deals. So my worry is not with getting the money in. My worry is how it's being activated and how it's being interpreted in some schools versus others.
Are you and Graham at Clemson committed to playing those games in 29-30 at your campuses?
We're in talks right now. I've got to get through some other stuff first, but Graham and I have been in talks, and we'll see how that evolves over time. But right now, my primary focus is on the Florida State game and where that game's going to be played.
So, as you talked about, that could also shift to digital, possibly?
Possibly, we'll see. Yeah, everything's on the table right now with that. But right now, the focus is purely on the Florida State game.
Just to kind of follow up on that, as you talked about with tennis, having that on campus brings energy and vibes. I think you said yesterday, something like that. Is that not the same for football, or is just the financial components so different?
That's a gotcha question you're trying to get me with right there. I see what you're talking apples and oranges, and people already asked me that question, right? Like when we talk about tennis in Orlando, we're talking about a neutral site where there's not many people there except for the families of the kids, right? We're talking about a couple hundred people watching the national championship tennis match at a neutral site with no energy. We talk about a neutral site where we've played Clemson and Charlotte, where we've played Oregon and Atlanta. Those stadiums have been filled with half and half. There's still juice, there's still energy. Of course, now look, and you got to remember, when we're talking about adding a ninth conference game at Tech, 10, we can't, if we go home and continue this, we could be in a situation where we have 5 home games. So from a very logical, practical standpoint, it's better off that we have a game like that neutral versus playing a situation where we only have 5 home games a year. And like I said, look at those games we've had in Atlanta and Charlotte. They've been wildly successful, and it's been energy. So it's not a fair comparison. I know it's an easy way to gotcha and say you said this on this end, but it's not apples. It's apples to
I
oranges.
mean, that's what your Twitter replies would have said. I mean,
So, but I would expect more from you than a Twitter response.
well, I'm speaking for.
You're speaking for the Twitter response?
They don't have to answer
Let me ask
questions.
you this question. Do you judge the city by the graffiti on the subway?
I don't even know what you're doing.
Well, Twitter responses are graffiti on the subway.
All right.
I would expect, you're a journalist with high integrity. I would expect a lot more from you.
I agree with that.
Josh, the Brendan Sworsby situation at Texas Tech has been a big conversation point. What has education on sports gambling been like for student athletes here at Georgia? And do you feel like any of that needs to be tweaked, not only because of the Sworsby case, but there's been other situations?
Well, if you remember, President Morehead and myself were extremely vocal a year ago when it was first reported that we were going to open up some avenues to let student athletes gamble, which we thought didn't make sense at a time and age where we were adding $20.5 million into the ecosystem. And we know that data says that gambling is one of the most addictive things for young men and young women out there right now. And with all these simple ways that they can do it, it's very scary. So we put a lot of education into it. We have some preventative software that hopefully, but nothing's 100%, but it's scary. I mean, look, I've got 3 boys that are 14, 16, and they just seeing the way they get excited about free fantasy football and the way that they follow that, you can tell that this is something that's scary. And as we talk about prop betting and things like that, so that's why I'm glad that we've held firm in this state that it's not legal, because it's a scary proposition for a lot of young men and young women in that age demographic.
Time for 1 or 2 more. That's good.
Jere, I've seen you at a lot of baseball games. I'm curious what your thoughts are on what you've seen Wes build with this program in year 3.
I think he's amazing. Josh has made a lot of great hires, but he's got to be at or near the top. He's done a fantastic job, and just how do you compare his record to any other record over a 3-year span? So we've definitely, I think, hit on a great coach with him.
Josh, we talked yesterday about the need for legislation. When you look to spring meetings next week, how much do you think is going to be discussion versus you guys actually making decisions and coming out of the meetings?
That's a good question. We've had a lot of pre-discussions headed into this meeting, and I think we're ready to make some, I would say, recommendations on how to move forward in this, because this isn't something where it's like a vote that we're pulling this lever. It's more about how are we building, or what would this new system look like in terms of, again, we said it's not a breakaway, but how do we give ourselves the opportunity to govern ourselves on some of these issues, where we're talking about implementing the settlement or things like that. So I think it's more of a how procedurally could we do this to protect ourselves and do what's best for the SEC.
All we heard all week long was that there would be a bill introduced in the Senate this week. And now we're at Memorial Day weekend, no bill was introduced. That to me is telling the SEC we're going to have to come up with our own solution.
All right, thank you.